The alarm on my wrist pulses twice before I even open my eyes. 2 pulses means one thing: a council ship has entered our system without asking. I am already moving before my mind catches up with my body, pulling on my uniform in the dark, counting my own heartbeat to stay calm. 30 years of training taught me this. Never let them see you rush. Never let them see you afraid. My name is Elias Kane. I am the Senior Liaison Officer for Earth's Unified Assembly, which is a polite way of saying I am the man who sits in rooms full of creatures who do not consider me their equal, and I say almost nothing. That is my job. That has always been my job. Silence, patience, and watching. I reach the command deck of our orbital station within 4 minutes. Captain Olivia Grant is already there, her eyes fixed on the display, her jaw tight. She does not look at me when I walk in. She simply says one word: Inspectors. I feel my stomach tighten. Inspectors from the Galactic Council do not visit for pleasant reasons. They visit to measure us, to test us, to remind us of our place. I walk to the display and study the shape of the approaching vessel. It is an OSI cruiser, sleek and pale, moving with the unhurried confidence of a species that has never once doubted its own superiority. They gave no warning, Olivia says, no formal request, just arrived. That's new, I say, though my voice stays level. Inside, something colder is forming. For 30 years, the Council has followed its own rules when dealing with us. Rules built on old fear and older prejudice, but they have always, at the very least, announced themselves. This silence from them, this sudden boldness, feels like a test. I think back to the reason we live this way. 30 years ago, humanity was not a member of any council. We were not even a whisper in the galaxy's long memory. Then the Kryvex came, a raiding fleet from beyond the outer rim, hungry for resources and expecting no resistance from a species they assumed to be primitive. They found resistance. They found more than they expected. Earth burned in places, and so did their ships, and when it was over, we had won a war that the wider galaxy did not even know was happening. When the first council envoys finally arrived, drawn by the wreckage and the radio chatter, they did not find grateful survivors waiting to be rescued. They found a species already rebuilding, already armed, already suspicious of strangers offering kindness. The council studied us the way one studies a dangerous animal that has wandered into a quiet village. They were polite. They were careful. They were also, from that very first meeting, condescending in ways I have spent 3 decades learning to absorb without reaction. They called our victory over the Kryvex a matter of luck and desperation, not skill. They said our species was too young, too emotional, too unpredictable to be trusted with real standing among civilized worlds. They allowed us into their council, but only as observers, seated at the edge of every chamber, permitted to listen, but rarely permitted to speak. And so Earth made a choice that shaped everything that followed. We chose silence, not because we accepted their judgment, but because silence let us watch without being watched in return. It let us learn their politics, their weaknesses, their fears, while they wasted years underestimating ours. I glance at the cruiser's approach vector on the screen. Take us to standard greeting protocol, I tell Olivia, nothing more. She nods, though I can see the tension in her shoulders. Olivia has flown escort for 3 different council delegations in the past 2 years, and each time she has watched them treat our pilots like servants rather than hosts. I do not blame her for the anger simmering behind her calm face. I feel it too. I simply do not let it show, because showing it has never once helped us. 40 minutes later, the OSI delegation shuttle docks with our station, and I walk down the corridor to greet them personally, my hands folded behind my back, my expression carefully arranged into something between respect and distance. The delegation leader is called Visatrian Ol, a tall, pale being with narrow silver eyes that never seem to blink. I have met his kind before. The OSI value order above almost everything else, and they see humanity as a walking argument against the very idea of order. Liaison Kane, Visatrian says, his translator device rendering his voice into flat, careful English. We apologize for our unannounced arrival. Circumstances required speed. Circumstances, I repeat, keeping my tone neutral. May I ask what circumstances bring the Council to Earth's system without notice? He studies me for a long moment, the way a scientist studies a sample under glass. The Council has grown concerned, he says, about the pace of your species' expansion. 2 new colonies established this cycle. A research vessel spotted near restricted trade corridors. Several unregistered technological advancements reported by observing envoys. Every word he says is a small blade, wrapped in diplomatic cloth. I know exactly what this means. They are not here to inspect. They are here to warn us that they are watching more closely than before, and that our quiet growth, the very thing that has kept us safe, has finally caught their attention. We have followed every treaty obligation, I say, every colony registered, every ship logged. Of course, Visatrian says, and something in the way he says it makes my skin prickle. We do not doubt your paperwork, Liaison Kane. We doubt your restraint. I do not answer that. I have learned, over many years, that silence is often the sharpest reply available to me. He waits for a reaction that does not come, and something flickers behind his silver eyes, something that might be irritation, or might be the beginning of respect. It is hard to tell with the Osai. It has always been hard to tell. The inspection lasts 6 hours. I walk beside Visatrian and 2 of his aides through sections of our station cleared and prepared weeks in advance for exactly this kind of visit, because we always assume it is coming. They see clean corridors, standard equipment, ordinary crew going about ordinary business. They do not see the deeper levels. They do not see the research decks buried beneath layers of official denial, the ones that do not appear on any registered schematic given to outside eyes. Some doors in this galaxy are better left unopened, and I make sure, with quiet efficiency, that those doors stay closed. When the inspection ends, Visatrian stands at the airlock preparing to leave, and he turns back to me one final time. You understand, he says, that the Council's patience with your species is not unlimited. There are voices among the members who believe humanity should never have been granted a seat at all, even a silent one. I understand, I say. Good, he says. Then, almost as an afterthought, he adds words that will stay with me far longer than he probably intended. It would be wise for your people to remain as quiet as they have always been. Quiet species survive longer in this galaxy. Liaison Kane. Loud ones rarely do. I watch his shuttle detach and drift away into the dark, and I stand at the viewport long after Olivia has gone to file her reports, thinking about his words. Quiet species survive longer. He means it as a threat, or perhaps as advice. I cannot be certain which, but he does not understand the real reason we have stayed quiet. It was never about survival through submission. It was about survival through patience, through preparation, through building something they could not yet see. Later that night, I sit alone in my quarters, reviewing the encrypted summary I must send to Earth Command. I type slowly, choosing each word with the same care I use in every council chamber, because these reports shape decisions that ripple across our entire species. I write about the unannounced arrival. I write about the mention of unregistered colonies and technological advancement. I write, most carefully of all, about the warning at the end, the suggestion that some among the Council already question whether we deserve even the small space we have been given. Before I send the report, I pause and look at a small photograph pinned beside my terminal, one of the only personal items I keep in this metal room so far from home. It shows my sister, Nora Kane, standing in front of a half-built greenhouse dome, her hands covered in soil, laughing at something outside the frame. She left Earth 2 years ago to help establish Kepler's Rest, one of our newest colonies, built quietly, built carefully, built with the same patient caution that has guided everything we do among the stars. I think of Visatrian's words again. 2 new colonies established this cycle. He was talking about places like Nora's home. I send the report. Then I sit in the silence of my quarters, listening to the low hum of the station around me. And for the first time in a long while, that silence does not feel like safety. It feels like the quiet before something breaks. 3 days later, a formal notice arrives from the council chambers, requesting my presence at an emergency session. Formal notices are rare. Emergency sessions are rarer still. I read the notice twice, then a third time, searching for any hint of its true purpose hidden beneath the polished diplomatic language, but the words give nothing away. They never do. That is the game we all play, every species at that table, hiding intention behind courtesy. I pack quickly, tell Olivia to keep the station on quiet alert while I am away, and board the transport that will carry me across 3 star systems to the Council's central chamber. During the long journey, I find myself thinking not about strategy or diplomacy, but about the photograph on my desk, about my sister's laughter, about the quiet dome she has built with her own hands on a world so far from the one where we were both born. I do not yet know what waits for me in that chamber. But something in Visatrian's parting words has followed me onto this ship, settling into my chest like a stone. Quiet species survive longer, he told me. I wonder, as the stars streak past my window, whether that is still true, or whether the Council is finally preparing to test exactly how far our silence can be pushed before it breaks. I close my eyes and try to rest, but sleep does not come easily. Something has shifted. I can feel it, the way sailors once claimed to feel a storm long before the sky ever changed color. Whatever waits at the end of this journey, I understand, without yet knowing why, that it will not be an ordinary session. It will be the beginning of something none of us can take back. The Council chamber is a vast circular hall built from a pale stone that seems to absorb sound rather than carry it, so that even 1,000 voices speaking at once would sound like a distant murmur. I have sat in this chamber more times than I can count, always in the same seat, near the back, in the section reserved for observing species. Today, as I take my place, I notice something different. The usual quiet chatter before a session begins is missing. Delegates from a dozen worlds sit in silence, watching a central display that has not yet activated. Something heavy hangs in the air, and I feel it settle over my shoulders the moment I sit down. Ambassador Clara Bennett, Earth's senior representative to the full Council, sits beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She has held this position for nearly a decade, longer than anyone else in our small delegation, and I have never seen her this still. Usually she taps her fingers when she is nervous, a small habit she thinks no one notices. Today her hands do not move at all. They called this session 2 hours after your report reached command. She whispers to me without turning her head. 2 hours, Elias. That is not a coincidence. Before I can answer, the chamber lights dim and a tall figure rises at the center platform. I recognize her as Counselor Ithrith Val, one of the presiding voices of the Iridian Magistrates, a species known across known space for their obsession with order and their long memory for old grievances. Her voice, translated into flat common speech, fills the chamber without her needing to raise it. Members of the Council, she begins, we convene today to address a matter of growing concern. The species designated Earth origin, commonly known as humanity, has continued to expand its territorial reach at a pace this Council finds troubling. A murmur moves through the chamber, though it is careful, restrained, the sound of creatures who know they are being watched as closely as they watch others. I keep my face still, my hands resting calmly on my knees, though inside I feel the first tremor of real alarm. Reports from inspection teams, Ithrith continues, confirm the establishment of at least 2 new colonies within the past cycle, alongside evidence of technological development inconsistent with the growth restrictions this Council has long recommended for younger species. We are not here today to accuse, we are here to decide. Decide what? Clara says quietly beside me, though I know it is not truly a question meant for me. We both already suspect the answer, and a moment later, Ithrith confirms it. This Council proposes the immediate adoption of a species development cap, applicable to Earth origin humanity, limiting further colonial expansion, restricting access to advanced propulsion and defense technologies, and requiring full disclosure of all research activities to a Council Oversight Committee. The words land in the chamber like a struck bell, and I feel the sound of them settle into my bones. A development cap is not a small thing. It is a leash. It would mean Nora's colony, Kepler's rest, could face immediate restriction, could lose supply lines, could be forced to abandon expansion projects already underway. It would mean generations of careful, patient growth, reduced to whatever the Council decides is acceptable for a species they have never fully trusted. Clara rises to speak, requesting the floor with the formal gesture required by Council protocol, and after a long pause, Ithrith grants it. I watch my ambassador stand tall despite the tightness I know she feels in her chest, and I admire her for it, because I do not know if I could summon the same steadiness in her place. Honored Council, Clara begins, Earth has met every treaty obligation asked of us since our admission to this body. Our colonies are registered. Our research is conducted within agreed boundaries. We ask, respectfully, what evidence supports such a severe and sudden restriction? Ithrith's silver eyes fix on her without warmth. The evidence, Ambassador, lies simply in your species' pattern of behavior. Rapid growth, rapid adaptation. A history of violence resolved not through negotiation, but through overwhelming force, as demonstrated during your conflict with the Kryvex raiders. This council has long debated whether such tendencies represent a stabilizing strength or a lasting danger. Recent reports suggest the latter interpretation grows more convincing. I feel anger rise in my chest, sharp and sudden, though I do not let it reach my face. They still measure us by that old war, still treat our survival as evidence of danger rather than resilience. 30 years, and they have learned nothing new about us, because they have never once truly looked. The debate stretches on for hours. Delegates from a dozen species rise to speak, some in cautious support of the cap, citing old fears passed down through generations of council tradition, others urging patience, urging fairness, urging the council to remember that judging an entire species by the actions of its ancestors sets a troubling precedent for every young civilization yet to come. I recognize a familiar voice among the more sympathetic speakers, an Osai delegate named Threnna Ul, part of a smaller faction within her own species that has, over the years, shown quiet respect for humanity's caution and restraint. She speaks carefully, choosing her words with the same diplomatic precision I have learned to use myself. This council prides itself on fairness, Threnna says. Yet I hear little discussion today of proportion. A development cap of this severity has historically been reserved for species demonstrating active aggression toward council members. Humanity has shown no such aggression in 3 decades of membership. I ask this body to consider whether fear, rather than evidence, drives today's proposal. Her words earn a ripple of quiet agreement from a handful of delegates, but the majority remains unmoved, their positions already decided long before this session began. I understand, watching the chamber, that this vote was never truly in question. The council called this emergency session not to debate, but to formalize a decision already made in quieter rooms, among smaller groups, long before Clara and I ever walked through these doors. When the vote finally comes, it passes by a wide margin. The species development cap is adopted, effective immediately, and I watch Clara's shoulders sink almost imperceptibly as the final tally displays across the central platform. She does not show defeat openly, not here, not in this chamber, but I know her well enough to see it in the careful stillness of her posture. As the session ends and delegates begin filing out, Clara turns to me, her voice low. "I need you to reach Kepler's rest immediately," she says, "before the official notice does. They need to hear this from us first, prepared, not blindsided by a council envoy showing up at their door." I nod, already moving toward the communication terminal reserved for our delegation, my mind racing through the logistics of the message I must send. But before I can begin, a young aide from the council's administrative office approaches, her expression carefully blank in the way trained diplomats learn to master. "Liaison Kane," she says, "I have been asked to inform you of an additional development. A council enforcement vessel, assigned to monitor compliance along the outer trade corridors, has reported an incident involving a human research vessel." My hands go still over the terminal. What kind of incident? The details remain under review, she says, though something in her careful tone tells me she already knows more than she is permitted to share. I am told there were casualties. The word lands heavier than the development cap itself, heavier than anything spoken in that chamber today. How many? I ask, my voice quieter than I intend. 12. Liaison Kane. The Council's preliminary statement describes it as a regrettable containment error during a routine compliance patrol. I stand very still, staring at her, feeling something cold settle deep in my chest, spreading outward until my hands, resting on the terminal, feel distant from my own body. 12 people. A research vessel, likely unarmed, likely doing nothing more than the quiet scientific work our species has always favored, caught in what they are already calling, before any real investigation has taken place, a regrettable error. I think of every year I have spent in rooms like this one, absorbing insults with a steady face, choosing patience over anger, because patience kept us safe, because silence bought us time to grow strong enough that no one could threaten us the way the Kryvex once did. I think of Visatrian's warning 3 days ago. Quiet species survive longer, and I wonder, standing in this cold chamber with the news of 12 dead still settling into my bones, whether that has ever actually been true, or whether it was simply the lie the Council needed us to believe. I send my message to Kepler's Rest that evening, carefully worded, calm on the surface, warning Nora and the colony's leadership of the new restrictions before the official notice arrives. I do not mention the research vessel. I do not yet have enough confirmed information to include it, and I do not want to frighten her with rumors. But as I finish the message and prepare to transmit it across the vast distance separating us, my hand hesitates over the send command, and for a moment I consider adding one more line, something to warn her, something to tell her to be careful, to watch the sky a little more closely than usual. I do not add the line. I tell myself it is because I have no concrete threat to warn her about, nothing but a vague unease and a council statement dismissed as an unfortunate error. I tell myself this, and I send the message as written, and I try to believe my own reasoning as the transmission disappears into the dark between the stars. That night, back in the small quarters assigned to our delegation, I sit awake long after Clara has gone to rest, reviewing every piece of information I have gathered since the inspection 3 days ago. The unannounced OSI visit, the sudden emergency session, the swift, almost predetermined vote on the development cap, and now, arriving in the same short window of time, a dead research crew and a council explanation that sounds, the more I read it, less like an accident and more like a message. I do not sleep that night. I sit at the terminal, staring at the star map showing the distant location of Kepler's Rest, a small blinking marker representing my sister's home, and for the first time since I accepted this post so many years ago, I feel the old, familiar comfort of silence beginning to crack beneath something I have not allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Fear, yes. But beneath the fear, something sharper, something that has been building quietly for 30 patient years, waiting, the way we always wait, for the moment it would finally be needed. I do not yet know that within days, that moment will arrive, and that the careful, patient silence I have built my entire career around is about to end forever. The transmission reaches me 4 days later, while I am still aboard the delegation transport returning from the council chambers. I am reviewing supply reports when the alert tone cuts through the quiet cabin, sharp and insistent, the kind of tone reserved for messages marked highest priority. I open the channel expecting an update from Clara. Instead, I see the face of General Edward Hale, commander of Earth's Outer Colony Defense Network, and the moment I see his expression, I know something has gone terribly wrong. "Elias," he says, his voice tight and controlled in the way trained officers speak when they are holding themselves together by force of will alone. "I need you listening carefully. A council enforcement fleet has entered the space surrounding Kepler's Rest." My chest tightens. Entered for what purpose? "They are calling it a preventative disarmament action," he says, citing the colony's proximity to restricted development zones under the new council cap. They claim intelligence suggesting unauthorized technological activity. "That is not possible," I say, my voice rising despite every year of training that taught me to stay calm. Kepler's Rest is an agricultural colony. There is nothing there but greenhouses and water reclamation stations. I know that, Edward says. You know that. The Council Fleet Commander does not seem to care. I close my eyes for one brief moment, gathering whatever composure I have left, then open them again. How long until they act? Elias, he says, and something in the way he says my name tells me the answer before he speaks it. They have already acted. The cabin around me seems to grow very quiet, the hum of the transport's engines fading into something distant and unimportant. Nora, I say, though it comes out barely above a whisper. We do not have full details yet, Edward says quickly. Communications from the colony went dark 11 minutes ago. I have a transport rerouting you to the nearest observation point along the corridor. You will be able to see the system, though we cannot guarantee a safe approach. I do not remember agreeing. I only remember standing, moving toward the transport's small viewing deck, my hands trembling in a way I have not allowed them to tremble in longer than I can remember. The pilot, a young officer named Simon Wade, meets my eyes through the cockpit mirror and says nothing, simply adjusting our course toward the observation point General Hale specified, his hands steady on the controls, even as his jaw remains tight, with the same dread I feel spreading through my own chest. The journey takes nearly 3 hours, though it feels like a lifetime compressed into every passing minute. I sit at the viewing deck, watching the stars streak past, thinking of my sister's laughter in that photograph pinned beside my terminal, thinking of the half-built greenhouse dome and the soil on her hands, thinking of every message I have sent her over the past 2 years, each one a little too formal, a little too careful, because that is how I have learned to speak to everyone, even the people I love most. When we finally arrive at the observation point, Simon brings the transport to a careful stop at the edge of the system, far enough to remain undetected, close enough to see. I stand at the viewing deck and look out at what remains of Kepler's Rest, and for a long moment I cannot make sense of what I am seeing. The colony's main dome, the one Nora helped build with her own hands, is gone. Where it once stood, there is only scorched ground and drifting debris, catching the light of the system's distant sun in slow, silent spirals. Smaller structures along the colony's edge still burn, thin trails of smoke rising into a sky that no longer has any atmosphere left to carry them properly. Above it all, 3 Council enforcement vessels hold position in low orbit, their hulls pale and untouched, as though nothing at all has happened beneath them. I do not speak. I do not move. I simply stand at the viewing deck and watch my sister's home burn from a distance too great to help, too great to do anything but witness, and something inside me that has held steady through 30 years of careful diplomacy finally breaks apart in complete and total silence. Simon's voice reaches me eventually, gentle, careful. Commander Kane, I am picking up survivor signals from the colony's underground shelters. Several groups, still transmitting. The words cut through my daze, like a blade through fog. How many? Unclear. The signal is weak, but it is there. Hope, sharp and painful, cuts through the numbness in my chest. Get me a channel to General Hale, I say, my voice steadier now, steadier than I expect it to be. Now. Within minutes, Edward's face appears again on the small display, and I can see from his expression that he has already seen the same devastation I am looking at through the viewing deck glass. Elias, he says quietly, I am sorry. I know she was there. There are survivor signals, I say, cutting past whatever comfort he might have offered. Underground shelters. We need extraction teams moving immediately. They are already moving, he says. But Elias, listen to me. The Council fleet remains in orbit. If we send extraction ships without escort, they may be fired upon as well. I feel something cold and clear settle over the grief still raw in my chest, something I do not fully recognize at first, because I have never allowed myself to feel it this strongly before. It takes me a moment to understand what it is. It is resolve, sharpened into something almost unbearably sharp by loss. Then send escort, I say. Elias, Engaging that fleet directly would violate every restraint protocol we have followed for 30 years. They just violated an agricultural colony full of unarmed civilians, I say, my voice rising now, no longer able to hold the careful diplomatic calm I have spent my entire career perfecting. How many more restraint protocols do you intend to honor while our people burn beneath ships that call it prevention? There is a long silence on the other end of the channel. When Edward speaks again, his voice has changed, something hardening beneath the exhaustion and grief I can hear in every word. I need authorization from the Assembly before I can commit defense forces to a direct engagement with a Council fleet. Then get it, I say. Because I am not going to stand here and watch our extraction teams die under Council fire while we wait for permission to protect our own people. Another silence. Shorter this time. I will reach out immediately, Edward says. Stay at the observation point. Keep that survivor signal locked. We are not leaving anyone behind, Elias. I promise you that. The channel closes, and I stand alone at the viewing deck once more, watching the slow, terrible spiral of debris where a colony once stood, watching the smoke rise from structures that no longer hold anyone I can see or hear or reach. Simon approaches quietly and stands beside me, saying nothing for a long while, simply offering the kind of silent presence that asks nothing in return. She built that dome herself, I say eventually, my voice barely above a whisper. I have a photograph of her standing in front of it, laughing. I keep it beside my terminal. I look at it every single day. Simon does not offer empty comfort, does not tell me everything will be fine, and I am grateful for that small mercy. He simply nods and says, "The survivor signal is still transmitting, Commander. That means people are still down there, still fighting. Your sister built things to last. Maybe that shelter held because of the same hands that built the dome." I hold on to that thought as tightly as I can, because it is the only thing keeping me standing upright in this moment. The only thing keeping the cold resolve in my chest from collapsing into something far darker. I think of 30 years of careful silence, 30 years of absorbing insults and warnings, and careful diplomatic condescension, because silence kept us safe, because patience bought us time. I think of Visatrian's words, "Quiet species survive longer," and I understand now, watching my sister's colony burn beneath ships that call this devastation a preventative action, that whatever safety our silence once purchased has just been spent in full. Word reaches us 2 hours later that the Assembly has granted emergency authorization. Defense forces are moving. I do not yet know what shape that response will take, what ships will answer this call, what 30 years of quiet preparation have actually built in the shadows, while the wider galaxy assumed we remained as harmless and restrained as we always appeared. But standing at that viewing deck, watching smoke rise over the wreckage of my sister's home, I understand with absolute clarity that something fundamental has changed, not just in me, but in the entire careful strategy our species has followed since the day the Council first looked at us with suspicion instead of gratitude. The silence is over. I feel it the way one feels a held breath finally released, the way one feels a long winter finally breaking into something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous than the quiet that came before it. Somewhere beneath that wreckage, my sister is still fighting to survive, and somewhere across the vast distance separating our worlds, Earth is finally preparing to answer for her, and for everyone else who has paid the price of a galaxy that mistook our patience for weakness. The ships arrive out of nowhere, or so it must seem to the Council fleet, still holding position above the wreckage of Kepler's Rest. I know better. I know exactly where they have come from, because I have spent 30 years helping keep their existence a carefully guarded secret. They emerge from behind the system's outer moon, a formation of vessels unlike anything the wider galaxy has ever seen from humanity. Sleek hulls built from technology we reverse-engineered in silence, powered by drive systems developed in hidden shipyards buried deep within asteroid fields no Council inspector ever thought to search. I stand at the viewing deck of my own small transport, watching the formation move with a precision that steals the breath from my chest, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I understand fully what our patience has actually purchased. Not weakness, not submission, preparation. The lead vessel in the formation is called the Horizon, a name chosen years ago in a quiet planning session I attended myself, back when this entire defense initiative existed only as classified blueprints and cautious budget allocations hidden from every council audit. Commander Daniel Ashford leads the formation from its bridge, and his voice reaches me moments later through an open channel, steady and calm despite the enormity of what we are about to attempt. "Commander Kane," he says, "General Hale has cleared us for direct engagement. We have your sister's shelter coordinates locked. Extraction teams are moving the moment we secure the airspace above them." "Copy that," I say, my voice tighter than I intend, though Daniel does not comment on it. He simply nods once through the display and turns his attention back to his own bridge crew. The Council fleet reacts slowly at first, their sensors clearly struggling to process the sudden appearance of ships they have never encountered, ships that do not match any registered configuration in their vast archives of known species technology. I watch their formation shift, defensive posturing replacing the casual, untouched confidence they held only minutes before, and something in me finds a grim, quiet satisfaction in watching that confidence falter for the first time. "They are hailing us," Daniel reports. "Ignore it," I say. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to extract survivors and hold this airspace until every single person beneath that wreckage is safely aboard our ships." Daniel does not question the order. The Horizon and its formation move into position, spreading out to create a protective barrier between the Council fleet and the extraction shuttles now descending toward the colony's ruined surface. I watch the maneuver unfold with a mixture of fear and something close to awe, because this is not the improvised desperation of the Kryvex War 30 years ago, born from necessity and blind courage alone. This is precision. This is 30 years of quiet study, of watching every Council military doctrine, every alien engagement pattern, every weakness and strength observed across 3 decades of careful, patient silence, finally given shape and purpose. The Council fleet commander, a Thessari officer whose voice carries the sharp, clicking cadence of her species even through translation, finally opens a direct channel, her tone carrying equal parts confusion and barely restrained anger. "Unknown human vessels, you are interfering with an authorized Council enforcement action. Withdraw immediately or face consequences." I step forward and answer the channel myself, my voice carrying a calm I do not entirely feel, but have spent 30 years learning to project regardless. "This is Commander Elias Kane, Earth Unified Assembly. Your enforcement action has already ended. What remains is our extraction of survivors from a colony your fleet destroyed without cause. You will hold position and permit our ships safe passage, or we will consider any further hostile action against our people an act of open aggression." There is a long pause on the other end of the channel, filled only by the faint static of open space. "You have no authority to issue such demands," the commander finally says, though I can hear, beneath her sharp tone, the first thread of genuine uncertainty. "I am not asking for authority," I say. "I am telling you what will happen next." The extraction shuttles reach the surface moments later, and I watch through the Horizon's sensor feed as teams in protective gear move quickly across the scorched ground toward the underground shelter still transmitting its faint survivor signal. My hands grip the edge of the console so tightly my knuckles ache, every second stretching into an agony of waiting as the extraction teams work to breach the shelter's sealed entrance. Above the surface, the standoff holds, tense and fragile, 3 Council vessels facing a formation of human ships they have never before encountered, neither side willing to fire the first shot, both sides fully aware of exactly how quickly that fragile balance could shatter into something far worse. It is Daniel who finally breaks the silence on our end, his voice carrying urgently across the bridge. "Commander Kane, shelter breach successful. Survivors are being moved to extraction shuttles now. I am reading approximately 40 individuals emerging, more than we initially estimated." Relief floods through me so suddenly that I have to steady myself against the console, my breath catching in my throat. 40 people who built that dome, who tended those greenhouses, who chose to build a quiet life on a distant colony world, alive beneath the wreckage the Council left behind. I searched the sensor feed desperately, scanning the list of survivor identifications scrolling across the display, my eyes moving faster than I can properly read, until finally, I see the name I have been searching for. I do not remember sitting down. I only remember the sudden, overwhelming weight of relief pressing down on me, so different from the grief I carried only hours earlier, and for a brief, precious moment, I allow myself to simply breathe, to feel something other than cold resolve or careful diplomatic calculation. The moment does not last long. The Thessari commander's voice returns to the channel, sharper now, more agitated. Your extraction is complete. You have no further reason to remain in this system. Withdraw your vessels immediately. I straighten, pushing the relief aside to make room for what must come next. We will withdraw, I say, once you have surrendered command authority over this engagement and submitted to formal review by the full Galactic Council regarding the destruction of an unarmed civilian colony. That is not within your authority to demand, she snaps. Perhaps not, I say, but it is within our capability to enforce. What follows is not a battle in the way old stories describe such things, not chaos and desperation, but something colder, more controlled, more devastating in its precision. The horizon and its formation move with practiced coordination, disabling propulsion systems on 2 of the 3 Council vessels within minutes, careful, deliberate strikes designed to incapacitate rather than destroy, because even now, even after everything, we do not wish to become the very thing the Council has always feared us to be. The 3rd vessel, the Thessari commander's own flagship, attempts to flee toward the system's outer edge, only to find its path blocked by a second formation of human ships that emerged silently from concealment only moments before, another piece of 30 years of quiet preparation finally revealed. The commander's voice returns to the channel one final time, and this time all the sharp confidence has drained from it entirely, replaced by something closer to genuine fear. Our propulsion systems are failing. We require assistance. You will receive it, I say, once you agree to formal surrender and full cooperation with Council review proceedings. A long pause follows, filled with what I imagine must be furious, desperate consultation aboard her bridge. When she finally speaks again, her voice carries a defeat I never expected to hear from a Council enforcement officer. We surrender, she says, under formal protest, but we surrender. I close my eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of what has just happened settle fully into my chest. For the first time in the recorded history of humanity's contact with the Galactic Council, an alien military commander has formally surrendered to a human vessel. 30 years of quiet preparation, 30 years of careful silence, all of it converging into this single, precise moment above the wreckage of a colony we could not save in time, but would not allow to be forgotten or dismissed as a mere error in judgment. News of the engagement spreads faster than I expect, rippling outward across communication channels I do not even have clearance to monitor directly. I learn later that a faction of Osai delegates, including Threnna Ul, the same voice who spoke in cautious support of humanity during the Council session days earlier, publicly questioned the wisdom of the development cap and the enforcement action that followed it, citing the engagement above Kepler's rest as clear evidence that the Council had dangerously underestimated both our capability and our restraint. Aboard the Horizon, I finally have a moment to speak with Nora directly, her face appearing on a small display, tired, bandaged along one arm, but unmistakably, gratefully alive. You came, she says, her voice rough but steady. I promised I always would, I say, my own voice breaking slightly despite every effort to keep it steady. The dome is gone, she says quietly. Everything we built. We will build it again, I say, bigger this time, and this time no one will threaten to take it away without answering for it. She manages a small, tired smile, and for a long moment, neither of us says anything else, simply grateful to see each other's faces across the distance that nearly became permanent only hours before. As the horizon begins its slow return course, escorting the disabled council vessels toward a neutral station for formal review, I stand once more at the viewing deck, watching the wreckage of Kepler's Rest shrink into the distance behind us. 30 years of silence have ended, not in defeat, but in something far more complicated, a victory carved from loss, a strength revealed not through aggression, but through the simple, undeniable act of refusing to remain silent any longer, while our people paid the price of a galaxy's careless assumptions. I know, standing there, that what comes next will not be simple. The Council will not accept this outcome quietly. There will be consequences, negotiations, perhaps even further conflict before this is fully resolved. But for the first time in 30 years, I do not feel like a quiet observer seated at the edge of a chamber that barely tolerates my presence. I feel, for the first time, like the representative of a species finally ready to be heard. 3 weeks pass before I stand once more inside the Council's central chamber, and everything about the room feels different this time, though not a single stone of its architecture has changed. The pale walls still absorb sound the same way they always have. The circular seating still stretches around the central platform in the same careful arrangement it has held for centuries. What has changed is not the chamber itself, but the silence that fills it as I walk toward the platform reserved for formal testimony, a silence heavier and more attentive than anything I have felt in 30 years of quiet observation from the edges of this room. I am not seated in the observer section today. For the first time since Earth's admission to this body, a human representative stands at the central platform itself, invited to speak not as a curiosity to be studied, but as a voice the Council has finally, if reluctantly, chosen to hear directly. Clara Bennett stands beside me, her presence steady and reassuring, though today, this testimony belongs to me. I glance briefly toward the section where Visatrian Ol sits among the OSI delegation, his silver eyes fixed on me with an expression I cannot quite read, somewhere between wariness and something that might, if I am generous in my interpretation, resemble respect. Beside him, Threnna Ul offers the smallest, most careful nod, a gesture of solidarity I choose to hold on to as I begin. Councillor Ithreth Val, the same presiding voice who announced the development cap 3 weeks ago, opens the session with visible reluctance in her formal tone. This emergency session convenes to review the events surrounding the enforcement action at the human colony designated Kepler's Rest, and the subsequent engagement between Council and Earth origin vessels. Commander Kane, you have the floor. I take a slow breath, steadying myself the way I have steadied myself in countless smaller rooms across 30 years of careful diplomacy, though nothing in those 30 years quite prepared me for the weight of this particular moment. Honored Council, I begin, my voice carrying clearly across the wide chamber. 3 weeks ago, this body voted to impose severe restrictions on my species, based on evidence this Council itself has since acknowledged was incomplete and, in significant part, mistaken. Days later, an enforcement fleet destroyed an unarmed agricultural colony, killing dozens of civilians and injuring dozens more, an action this Council initially described, before any true investigation occurred, as regrettable but justified. I pause, letting the words settle across the chamber, watching the careful, controlled expressions of delegates who have spent centuries learning to hide their true reactions behind diplomatic composure. My sister was among those injured in that attack, I continue. She survived only because the shelter she and others built with their own hands held firm against destruction this Council authorized without proper cause. Many others were not so fortunate. A murmur moves through the chamber, quieter and more solemn than the murmur that followed the original announcement of the development cap 3 weeks earlier. I glance briefly at Ithrith, whose expression remains carefully neutral, though something in the stillness of her posture tells me even she understands the weight of what has happened under her presiding authority. For 30 years, I continue, humanity has chosen silence in this chamber. We have absorbed condescension, suspicion, and repeated reminders of our supposed unsuitability for full standing among civilized worlds, because we believed, or perhaps hoped, that patience would eventually earn the respect that aggression could not. We were wrong to believe that patience alone would ever be enough. What earned this council's attention was not our silence, it was our capability, revealed only when silence was no longer an option we could afford. I look around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of delegates from a dozen different worlds, some hostile, some curious, some, like Threnna Ull, quietly sympathetic. We are not here today seeking apology alone, though an apology is owed, and owed sincerely, to every family who lost someone at Kepler's Rest. We are here to establish new terms for humanity's place within this council, terms built not on assumption or old fear, but on demonstrated fact. Ithrith's voice cuts through the chamber, careful but not unkind. State your terms, Commander Kane. I nod once, gathering the full weight of what I am about to say. First, immediate repeal of the species development cap imposed against Earth-origin humanity, along with formal acknowledgement that the cap was based on incomplete and prejudicial assessment rather than verified threat. A pause, then a ripple of quiet consultation among the delegates, before Ithrith speaks again. Nodded. Continue. Second, I say, full council recognition of humanity as a sovereign, equal member of this body, with complete speaking and voting rights extended to all future sessions, rather than the limited observer status we have held since our original admission. This request draws sharper reaction, several delegates exchanging visibly uncertain glances, though none rise immediately in open objection. I press forward before hesitation can take root in the room. Third, I say, formal council oversight of the enforcement fleet commander responsible for the Kepler's Rest engagement, along with review of the broader enforcement protocols that allowed such an action to proceed without proper verification of threat. And finally, I say, my voice steady despite the enormity of what I am about to state, official acknowledgement, recorded in this council's permanent archives, that humanity's history of resolving conflict through decisive action, when necessary, reflects capability and resolve, rather than the instability this council has long assumed it to represent. The chamber falls into a long, heavy silence following my final words, delegates from every represented species processing the weight of what has just been formally requested, not as a plea, but as a set of terms delivered with quiet, unwavering confidence. It is Visatrian Ull who rises first from his seat among the OSI delegation, and I watch him with careful attention, uncertain what to expect from a delegate whose earlier warning to me, quiet species survive longer, still echoes in my memory. This council grants Commander Kane the floor to respond to questions, he says formally, before turning his silver eyes directly toward me. Commander Kane, you speak of demonstrated fact rather than assumption. I ask you directly, does humanity intend to pursue further military expansion beyond what this council considers necessary for basic defense? I meet his gaze steadily. Humanity intends to pursue whatever level of preparation ensures our people are never again forced to watch a colony burn while awaiting permission to defend it. If this council chooses to view reasonable defense as expansion, then I would ask this council to examine why the assumption of danger has always applied more readily to humanity than to the very fleets capable of destroying an unarmed civilian settlement without adequate cause. Visatrian holds my gaze for a long moment, and something shifts behind those silver eyes, something I have never seen from him before in all our previous encounters. A fair answer, he says finally, and sits back down without further comment, though the small nod he offers as he does so carries more weight than any formal statement could have provided. The deliberation that follows stretches across several more hours, delegates rising and speaking, some in continued caution, others, increasingly, in cautious support of the terms I have laid before them. Threnna Ull speaks at length about the danger of judging entire species based on fear rather than evidence, referencing the engagement above Kepler's Rest not as an act of aggression, but as proof of exactly the restraint and precision humanity has always claimed to value, even in the face of devastating provocation. When the final vote is called, I stand at the platform and watch the results tally across the central display, my heart steady despite the enormity of what hangs in the balance. The species development cap is repealed by a clear majority. Full sovereign membership, with complete speaking and voting rights, is granted to humanity by a narrower but still decisive margin. The Enforcement Fleet Commander responsible for Kepler's rest is placed under formal council investigation, alongside a broader review of the protocols that allowed such devastating action to proceed unchecked. I do not celebrate, not there in that chamber, not with the weight of everything lost still fresh in my chest. Instead, I simply stand quietly at the platform, feeling something settle inside me that has been unsettled for 30 long years. A strange, complicated peace, born not from victory alone, but from the simple, undeniable fact that our silence has finally been replaced with something the wider galaxy can no longer ignore or dismiss. As the session concludes and delegates begin filing out of the chamber, Clara approaches and rests a hand briefly on my shoulder. "You did well," she says quietly. "We did well," I correct her. "This was never one person's silence to break." She offers a small, tired smile and walks beside me as we exit the chamber together, stepping out into the wide corridor where a handful of delegates from various species still linger, watching us pass with expressions I have not seen directed at humanity before, something closer to genuine curiosity than suspicion, something that might, given enough time, eventually grow into real respect. I return to Earth 2 days later, and the first place I go, before even reporting formally to Assembly Command, is the medical facility where Nora continues her recovery, her arm still healing, though her spirit, as always, remains unbroken. She sits up when I enter, and for a long moment, neither of us says anything at all, simply grateful to share the same quiet room together after everything that has happened since that terrible day above Kepler's rest. "I heard about the council session," she says eventually. "Full sovereign membership. That's not small, Elias." "No," I agree. "It isn't." "Was it worth it?" she asks quietly, and I understand what she truly means beneath the simple question. Understand that she is asking about far more than the political outcome alone, asking about everyone who did not survive to see this new chapter begin. I sit beside her bed and consider the question carefully, the way I have learned to consider every important question across 30 years of careful diplomacy. No single achievement is worth what we lost, I say honestly. But what we lost was never going to be undone by continued silence either. At least now, if this galaxy asks anything of us again, they will have to ask it directly, and they will have to answer for what they ask in return. Nora nods slowly, reaching out to take my hand, and we sit together in comfortable silence for a long while. The same kind of silence I have spent my entire career carefully protecting, though this silence, unlike the one I carried for 30 long years, no longer feels like caution or restraint. It feels, simply, like peace, earned rather than granted, chosen rather than imposed. In the months that follow, humanity's new standing within the Council reshapes much of how the wider galaxy approaches us. Trade agreements expand, diplomatic channels open that were closed to us for decades. Some species remain wary, unwilling to fully abandon old prejudice built across 30 years of careful, condescending observation, but others, slowly, begin to extend the kind of respect that patience alone was never quite enough to earn. Kepler's rest is rebuilt within the year, larger and more resilient than before, its new central dome constructed with reinforced materials developed from the very technology once hidden from Council inspection, no longer a secret kept in silence, but a strength openly claimed. Nora returns to help lead the rebuilding effort, her laughter, when I visit months later, sounding exactly as it did in that photograph still pinned beside my terminal, though the greenhouse behind her now stretches wider, sturdier, built by people who understand, in a way they never quite did before, exactly what it costs to protect the things worth building. I return to my post as liaison officer, though the role itself has changed considerably since that quiet morning when an unannounced OSI cruiser first pulled me from sleep with 2 urgent pulses on my wrist. I no longer sit at the edge of the chamber, waiting silently while other species decide matters that affect my own. I sit, now, among equals, speaking when I believe something must be said, remaining quiet only when silence itself serves some genuine purpose, rather than simply protecting us from a galaxy too quick to judge and too slow to understand. Sometimes, late in the evening, I still think of Visatrian's warning from that very first inspection. Quiet species survive longer, and I understand now, far better than I did then, the deeper truth hidden beneath his careful words. It was never simply about staying quiet or staying loud. It was about knowing precisely when each approach served its purpose and having the strength, when the moment finally demanded it, to choose the harder path without hesitation. Earth stayed silent for 30 years, patient and watchful, building quietly in the shadows, while a galaxy full of older, prouder species assumed our restraint reflected weakness rather than preparation. That silence ended not because we grew tired of patience, but because patience alone could no longer protect the people we loved from a council too comfortable in its own assumptions to recognize the true cost of crossing a line it never expected us to defend. They mistook our silence for permission. That mistake, in the end, became the very reason our silence finally had to end.